Greetings everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Combining ITIL, Six Sigma and the Theory of Constraints in Streamlining IT Quality. Happy to have you all here with us. I am Art Tilamani, the Account Manager of Quality Management Systems here at PECB and the organizer of this webinar. This webinar will be presented by Bogdan Dragomir, a security professional with over 24 years of experience in the IT field and over 5 years as a regional security manager with Savvis Communications, being trusted advisor for many companies in South and Central U.S. and coordinating penetration testing across U.S., UK, and Six Sigma Lean Professional and Six Sigma Black Belt. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, or you can use the raise hand function. We will unmute you and you will have a chance to ask the question directly to Bogdan. Bogdan will answer all questions accordingly at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Please, Bogdan, you may continue with your presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bogdan Dragomir, as Arta said, and I'm here to talk with you about combining ITIL, Six Sigma, and theory of constraints in achieving a better IT, a more performant, and delivering a better quality of services. I would ask you to bear with me for another 2 minutes and see if more people will join, and then we shall start the presentation. Please feel free to ask any questions you might have, and I'll do my best to answer all of them at the end of the presentation. And if there are any questions that are left unanswered, I promise that I will answer them over email. So let's just wait another 2 minutes and we will start. Thank you. All right, I think we can start. I'm going to skip my presentation. You already heard it. Arta gave it to you. You probably saw it for about a minute there. But that's not why you came. Why you came is to talk about how we should use ITIL and Six Sigma in combination with theory of constraints to achieve a better IT. So let's first talk about ITIL, what ITIL is and what it does. ITIL is really defining a framework designed to deliver a good and sustainable support IT services. This framework has multiple components, and each component is well defined. It has been time vetted and multiple times implemented by many companies successfully, and some of them not successfully, in the sense that they have implemented ITIL only partially or they made it unsustainable. It can be adopted individually or as a whole. The best way to do it is to implement it as a whole. It does cover 8 basic processes, from design coordination, service catalog, service level management, availability management, capacity management, continuity management, security, and supplier management. These processes normally should be integrated, should be synchronized. Their output should feed in as input to the next process. It does try to achieve it. It is designed to achieve a number of 5 goals and objectives. The goals and objectives are strategy that is designed to achieve organizational objectives and meet customer needs. Arta and I had an interesting discussion on this topic, and I was saying that most of the companies kind of overlook customer needs as long as they cannot tie it directly to their revenue. Unfortunately, revenue is a measurement of the qualities of the customer satisfaction and not the other way around. Another objective is to define a plan for delivering the business objectives, granted that the business objectives are well articulated within the organization. That would be the design phase, the design goal. Transition is to ensure improved capability and introducing new services, because our industry, IT industry, is highly dynamic, and we have to adapt to the needs of the customer, and therefore achieving our previous goal, meeting customer needs, it entails having that dynamics in transforming our organization and our services. Operations, obviously, to ensure service management and contain them onto their supported environments, because if we go on other environments that are not supported by our processes, obviously the quality of our services is gonna decrease. And improvement that ties back onto that agility of our services, and converting our or transforming our processes onto more performant efficiency and to increase effectiveness of our processes. Six Sigma. Six Sigma was born mainly for the needs of diminishing the number of variations, of product variations, manufactured product variations. So it was born in the manufacturing sector. The way it works is based on empirical and statistical methods, and there are tools that are used for this. Thousands, hundreds of tools that are being used for deploying Six Sigma and working with Six Sigma. It works primarily at the level of local system, chain link, and it does take in consideration the interaction and immediate supplier and customer processes. It aims to identify and remove defects, causes, and minimize deliverable or product or business process quality variations. It uses two technologies, DMAIC and DMADV, and the target is to achieve at minimum a 3.4 defects per million of opportunities. One of my favorite mentors, let's call them, with the founder of Theory of Constraints is Elia Goldratt, that said that if you don't manufacture a quality product, all you're going to get at the end is a bunch of expensive mistakes, which is pretty true, pretty right on the money. Now, the Theory of Constraints, compared to Six Sigma, it's a more flexible approach. It's using logic as opposed to statistical and empirical data. It recognizes variation as an inherent business necessity. Elia Goldratt was saying that mistakes are necessary. So, on the same idea, the variations will always be there. And instead of minimizing the variation, we should adapt to the variation and make the best of it. It does focus on building processes adaptable enough to deal with the current variations, exactly what I said earlier. It uses a 5-step process improvement in that we would be looking at the constraint or bottleneck, where the bottleneck is. We will identify the constraint, we will exploit the constraint, subordinate the constraint, subordinate everything else to the constraint, and then elevate the constraint, and then repeat as part of our process improvement. Now, you probably wonder, why did we look at ITIL and Theory of Constraints and Six Sigma? Because ITIL has a component that is called ITSM, IT Service Management. IT Service Management is geared really towards improving quality and making quality of services sustainable. A project to implement ITSM can take from 12 months to 24 months. Projects that run beyond 12 months are harder to control in terms of scope. it's hard to keep personnel motivated and management interested. ITSM benefits or ITIL benefits lie in how processes interlock and work together to meet business needs. Implementing processes individually will result in reworking each process as a new process is going to be added. So overall, the IT services criteria would be to ensure agility, adaptability, responsiveness, and flexibility. Where agility would be a measure of the ability of IT services to respond to marketplace changes or to gain and maintain competitive advantage. The adaptability would measure the maximum quantity of production changes over a fixed amount of time. The responsiveness would be the measure of the time to fulfill the demand the customer needs. And the flexibility obviously measures the numbers of days or the amount of time that it takes to respond to a demanded change. We kind of scratched the surface on the differences between Six Sigma and theory of constraints. So on this slide, I'm kind of reiterating what I've said before. One is Six Sigma is hard data based, the other one is logic based. One, it uses quality tools for problem solving. The other one has a really unique approach to problem solving, considering problems reality context. And Elia Goldratt was saying that the more complex the situation is, the more inherent simplicity there is in it. So really, the more complicated the problem looks, the simpler the solution would be. The main difference is that one of them, Six Sigma, targets to minimize the variation, while theory of constraints tries to minimize the variation effect upon the deliverable. Quality is more important than quantity. We were talking about this at the beginning when I said that a lot of companies confuse quality with the revenue. They measure the revenue instead of measuring the customer satisfaction. And even when they measure customer satisfaction, that measurement is pretty superficial in my experience. What is the purpose of this presentation? The purpose of this presentation is to talk about how we can achieve a performant ITIL process using the Six Sigma main phases in order to define and minimize the variation related to IT services, and taking it down to the most granular level using theory of constraints, and use theory of constraints to determine the bottleneck, to eliminate the bottleneck, and to ensure optimization and sustainability in order to determine the next constraint in the need of optimization. Obviously, this is really not a one-time exercise. This should be a continuous program within an enterprise. Now, the Six Sigma phases, and throughout the next slides, we're going to talk about Six Sigma phases, and we will embed theory of constraints artifacts into the Six Sigma in order to minimize the time needed to implement ITIL. At the end, we should be getting an ITIL compliant process in a shorter time with a more sustainable approach. And although it might seem confusing, this approach should add simplicity to your ITIL implementation and ensure at the end customer satisfaction, because that's why we do it. We do it to improve the quality and as effect to improve the quality, customer satisfaction. So the first phase of Six Sigma is defined. During this phase, we would be looking at the expectations of the customer. We will be listening to the customers and see what exactly we are missing. We would be looking at at our internal processes, we will be doing the first phase of determination of the problem. Using theory of constraints will add simplicity and speed to this phase. It would take this phase onto the next phase, half onto the next phase, and therefore it would be, for those that are familiar with theory of constraints, we will not only preserve the project buffer, but we will increase the project time buffer. During this phase, we will ensure the synergy between ITIL and Six Sigma goals and the alignment of both with the business strategy. The next phase, the second phase of Six Sigma, is measure. During this phase, as I said, we already took a step onto this this phase during the previous one, but during this phase, we will assess the process, the current processes. In theory of constraints, we will be using a current tree diagram, and we will determine where we are today. We already know where we want to be. We defined that in the next step, in the previous step. We will define what a defect means from a Six Sigma perspective. From a theory of constraints perspective, we will define what the UD is, the undesirable effect is. We will look at the quality parameters, at the critical, at what we need to achieve. We would re-look at what we need to achieve in order to satisfy the customer needs. We will determine the objectives within the business context of our organization. During the third phase of Six Sigma, we would be analyzing the data gathered during previous phases. We will rule out all the trivial variations or the secondary negative effects, if you want to. We would be using theory of constraints to determine the main constraint, the vital variable, based on the documented undesirable effects. Really, an undesirable effect should be a serious condition, should be a condition, not a lack of activity, not a blame. We don't want to throw the blame or the cat onto somebody else's backyard. It should happen frequently and should have a serious negative outcome. Not incorporate the solution within the UD statement. We would, during this phase, we would run multiple scenario simulations, and based on the outcome from those scenarios, we will prioritize the constraints as per their placement in the critical chain. Now, the critical chain idea is, most probably everyone knows that the processes within an organization can be associated with the chain. The weakest process is the weakest link of the chain. Now, the strength of the chain, as you know, is given by its weakest link. So we would look at the weakest, the second weakest, the third weakest, and the fourth weakest, and so on and so forth, and we will prioritize the constraints based on those on those definitions that we're going to come up with as far as each individual process within the process chain. The fourth phase of Six Sigma is improved. This one is really where theory of constraints kind of shines, as opposed to Six Sigma. And applying theory of constraints will shift Six Sigma and increase the focus on the project, on this phase, and the effect on the final deliverable tremendously. Since we moved the Six Sigma approach using theory of constraints approach in the previous phase, we will be using theory of constraints to exploit, subordinate, and elevate the main constraint. That that cause of the UDE, that would be the undesirable effect, would be the main constraint. By doing so, we will overall increase the performance of our project, and we will increase and as effect, we will increase the performance of our process chain or our organizational operations. From the theory of constraints, if you didn't read it, we kind of learn one very important thing. Optimizing the entire organization doesn't mean at all that we optimize the unperformant process. We have to optimize the unperformant process to achieve an overall improved optimized performance. If we optimize the overall organization, all we're going to do is we will preserve the deficit of that associated with that process, and we will improve the non-performance as well. So we have to separate them and focus only where the problem is. The last phase of Six Sigma is control. During this phase, we would be looking at the optimized processes. We will make sure that our changes stick with the organization and they become sustainable. We would implement those controls that are really preventing the process from reverting back to its prior state. And those processes are not really automated. They are not only technology. They belong to people. So we got to use a lot of change management artifacts within this phase. And ultimately, we will have to document the lesson learned in order to, in case that something changes and we will revert back or we will find a similar situation, we can skip the design phases and go forward straight with the next phases. And that's exactly what I said earlier. During the next iteration of Six Sigma and theory of constraints combined, we can skip the first phase and we can use a shortened version of the first phase, focusing on checking in the previous determinations and see if they are still valid and relevant. Well, pretty much each school of thought has its own benefits and strengths. The results are using really on your commitment and user expertise and who is running the program. There is no best or better. It really depends on you. They all have a different approach, but they do share the same ultimate target. Their ultimate target is to solve a problem. The effect of solving the problem would be a quality, an improved quality of your service delivery. And this is one quote at the end of my presentation that I probably value the most. Quality in a product or service is not what the supplier puts in, is not the cost of it, is what the customer gets out of it and what he or she is willing to pay for. A product is not quality because it's hard to make and costs a lot of money. Customers pay only for what is of use to them and what gives them value. Nothing else constitutes quality. That would conclude my presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And I want to say thank you for attending the presentation today.
Thank you, Bogdan, for this excellent presentation. Now, with the time left, we will go ahead with questions. Therefore, if you have any questions, it's time to ask them. Please use the comment box or raise hand function. The first question is an interesting one. From your practical experience, how often have you seen this behavior of companies considering quantity over quality?
Uh, Too many times. And the reason I'm saying this is think about most of the companies. What do they demand? Do they demand a happy client or a paying client? What is that you are responsible for customer satisfaction or for fulfilling a quota? And I'm sorry if this question doesn't really straightforward um, answer your question, but I think it kind of gives you my view without actually putting the blame on anybody.
Thank you, Bogdan. The next question is, in your opinion, is Six Sigma a proven tool that added value to products or services leading to a satisfied customer?
Well, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, Six Sigma was born for manufacturing, for products. But it can be, and it has been extrapolated to services as well.
Thank you. Another question is, can you give some examples of trivial variation sources?
Trivial variation.
Yes, sorry.
Well, no, that's okay. Trivial variations I can give you a definition, not examples, because for examples we would have to go a lot deeper into a discussion that's going to take a lot more time. But trivial versus real, or let's call it main variation, would be secondary variations that are not the root cause for the main problem within the organization. I don't know if that gives you enough clarity, but it definitely gives you a start on thinking about what those variations could be.
Thank you. Another question is, can the lean philosophy be implemented in ITIL?
A lean philosophy would be probably one of the most recommended for ITIL, for IT especially. But I would say by doing you could do lean a lean philosophy with theory of constraints and shorten your project. You can definitely do only lean without theory of constraints or without sigma to achieve good ITL processes. It's just my choice for today's meeting. Today's presentation was Six Sigma and theory of constraints. It's not the only one by any means.
Thank you. The last question for today is going to be, when you say constraints while using Six Sigma approach, do you mean minimizing the unnecessary variations and only leaving the value-added processes rather than the constraints to the process?
Well, I typically don't say constraints in the Six Sigma context unless it is associated with theory of constraints application. But yes, it would be the constraint in that context would be the final. It would be the bottleneck of your processes. Let's call it. The only bottleneck that all your processes have, the one that causes your undesirable effect or the missed product.
Thank you, Bogdan. I also had a comment here written that they also very much agree in the last quote that you decided to put in the presentation by Peter Trucker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan, for this presentation. And I also want to...
I thank you for taking the time.
It is our pleasure. I also want to thank all the attendees as well for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. To keep up with our webinars, please check PECB's webinar schedule in our website, pecb.com, or our official social media network, since next week we are organizing webinars on interesting topics. Again, Bogdan, I want to thank you for the informative presentation, and I hope we will be able to hold even more interesting presentations in the future.
And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for taking the time to attend this presentation, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next one.
Great to hear. Enjoy your day, everyone.